Welcome again. Last Sunday of the month of January. Here we are, January 29th, 2023. Welcome to our Sunday school class, where we are going through the age of the patriarchs. And we are currently in the area of Genesis 31, which is where we will be picking up this morning, if you'd like to get yourself situated over there. So as we're looking at the age of the patriarchs here, I'm kind of OCD here. Let me move the speaker over here. There we go. And my mouse right here. There we go. Okay. So as always, the Bible is our number one source and authority, trumping all else, getting some background info as well from Egyptologist David Roll and his new chronology, fixing some noticed errors in the orthodox, commonly accepted chronology of ancient history and all that stuff, ancient societies. And when we make those corrections, we see it all suddenly falls in line with the Bible, which has never had to change. So we're in the Middle Bronze Age. So we are in the year 1698 BC, where we're going to be picking up. So setting the stage for us here. Over in China, we are still under Emperor Fa of the Xia Dynasty. And capital over here in modern Anyang is the city. And every time I come across his name, Fa, I think of the sound of music in do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, and Fa, a long, long way to go. So there he is, over there in Anyang in China. That back. And yeah, the zoom's a little frozen there, but that's okay. And over in Egypt, we have Pharaoh Senuseret II of the 12th dynasty in their middle kingdom. His father had died and he's reigning alone, but notice he has not brought his son on to co-reign with him, as was common in this middle kingdom, starting in this 12th dynasty here. So Senuseret II, current Pharaoh of Egypt, and we are in the lifetime of Isaac and his twin sons, Jacob and Esau, and now Jacob and Esau's kids. So Senuseret II, items from his time frame. Talked about traders from Midian coming to Egypt. That's from the time just a couple of years before Joseph was born. And we talked about the pectoral that was on the princess, and so that will actually come up a little later in our discussion here. There's the Uraeus snake there, protecting the pharaoh. And on from there, there's his tomb, and et cetera, et cetera. You get the idea. So that's Egypt. Over in Assyria, in their early days, get a little sketchy mapping out the timeline for them in these early days. Looks like their king is a guy named Icunum, over here out of their first capital city, Ashur, on the Tigris River. So that's Assyria, northern end of Mesopotamia. Mosul, Nineveh, a little further north of that. So he's up there. And then down here, in the area we're more familiar with, Sumer, Shinar, Mesopotamia, and all that. Two main city-states are competing against each other here. We've got over in Isin, we have a king named Ur-Ninurta. Isin's up here. And then the other one is over in Larsa, and their king is Mr. Gungunum, which is just a fun name to say. So there's Larsa a little further to the south. All righty. So those are the secular leaders of the world of this time frame. Now for our folks from the Bible, Isaac is over down here in Beersheba. At this point, he is 153 years old. Esau, as we've mentioned, is down this way in Mount Seir. And up here in Haran, in the larger area of Paddan Aram, is where Jacob is, where he's been working for a while. Jacob and Esau, the twin brothers, are now 93 years old. His two sons that we're going to focus on are Judah and Joseph. Judah is the line that Jesus Christ came through. And of course, we know Joseph not only through Egypt in the famine, Joseph is also from whom we get Joshua. So at this point in time, Judah is all of 6 years old, and little Joseph is 3 years old. Now, something I really want to point out that will have an impact on this morning's message. This red line here from Mount Sinai to Jerusalem that we've talked about earlier. This will actually be referenced in this morning's message on Galatians chapter 4. But here's what I point out about it. This red line shows Mount Sinai corresponding to Jerusalem above. Mount Sinai, which is actually known as Mount Jebel Makla in the range of the Jebel al-Lawz mountains. You know how there are latitudes and longitudes, right? There's the equator, and you got lines going above, lines going below, and then you got lines going this way as well. So you got horizontal lines, you got vertical lines for mapping out the earth. Mount Sinai here, Jebel Makla, is at 35.33549 degrees east. 35.3. Jerusalem above is at 35 degrees, 0.22556. A difference of 0.10993, or basically 1/10 of 1 degree off from each other. That's how much in line they are. Where does all this come from? Because I know you were dying to know. In 1884, the United States hosted the International Meridian Conference, where 22 nations agreed to make the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, London, England, 0.0 east. That's the starting point. We know for the lines of latitude, North Pole is 90 degrees north, South Pole is 90 degrees south, equator is 0. So Greenwich, London, England is 0 on the east-west axis. So we're 35 degrees east from Greenwich, London, for going around the globe. And the same thing was where the time zones come from. Greenwich Mean Time is 0, and we're so many hours off from that. So that's where all that comes from. And actually, mapping of the Earth according to latitude and longitude was actually done in ancient times as well, with as much of the world as they knew. So even in the BC days, they were recognizing some things. And so, but that's where we finally got what we have today. So now that we're all up to speed with that, we're at the year 1698 BC. Why? What happens? Pharaoh Senuseret II dies. His son was not co-reigning with him, but his son becomes the next pharaoh. He becomes the Pharaoh Senuseret III. And he now rules Egypt, and he is ruling by himself for 20 years. So Senuseret III. That is this guy here. And by the way, speaking of these pharaoh names, I want to make sure we don't forget this, just kind of keep in the back of our minds. We know pharaohs by the Greek versions of their names, just like Jesus is the Greek version of Joshua or Yeshua. No one called Ramses Ramses there in Egypt, just like no one called Jesus Jesus. So it's just how things ended up. We're just going by the Greek versions of these names. So what do we know about this guy, Senuseret III? See if you notice anything about his depictions in the statues and all that. Wakey, wakey. He actually was a great pharaoh in this 12th dynasty. He's considered perhaps the most powerful Egyptian ruler of this dynasty. So pay attention to his face as we kind of scroll through these things. Are you seeing anything different compared to images and statues we've seen before?
Well, the ears are pretty large.
Yes, absolutely right.
What's the cone head?
Saturday Night Live, yes. Okay, so we get the idea there. Okay. But you are right, and there are a couple other minor details that are noticeable as well. Let's see, where's a good example? That's a good example. That's a good example. So he was a great pharaoh. Military campaigns gave rise to an era of peace and economic prosperity. So because his military was strong, he was able to keep the peace, the country was able to grow economically, and he reduced the power of the local rulers, and he became more in power. And then there was a revival in craft work and trade and the development of the urban areas. He's actually one of the few Egyptian kings who is made into a god, deified, and honored with a cult while he was still alive. That didn't happen very often. Again, he's the son of Senuseret II. We know about 3 wives of his, but notice, as we pointed out, he's got a somber expression. His eyes are protruding from hollow eye sockets. You have pouches under them and lines under them. The mouth and the lips have a grimace of bitterness. And as was noticed, the ears are enormous and protruding forward. We'll move on to why a speculation is that that is the case with what happens during his pharaohdom.
I mean, he does look more realistic.
More realistic, yes.
Than the other statues of
Mhm.
Pharaoh and whatever.
Yeah.
He almost looks like he's alive.
Yeah, more, I'm blanking out on the word right now, but when an image, not just airbrush, but when an image is cleaned up to make it look more idealized, I guess is the word I'm trying to think of. He's less idealized and more realistic. That's a very important point. So something happens during his pharaohdom along with his son that the nation goes through that we will get to as we go. Getting back to those pectorals. Here's an example of one on a statue here being worn on the necklace, how it comes down onto the pecs here. So I wanted to go through a couple examples here. That's the of his son, Amenemhat III. I thought that was kind of neat seeing it kind of old and clunky looking. Looks kind of heavy, actually. You got another one here. There's the Uraeus serpent that spits out the poison to protect the pharaoh. It's from the princess. There's the eye, the ever-watching eye, ends up being on the top of the pyramid, on the back of our dollars, that kind of thing. And there's the one we've been talking about for the princess. So yeah, these are fairly common in the royalty and those who could afford them and all that. So let's take a look at this guy's pyramid, where he will possibly end up. Pyramid of Senuseret III. Again, nothing like those old pyramids we saw in Giza back in the early kingdom. Well, we're now in the Middle Kingdom. So there it is. Kind of a lump of dirt. That's not it. That's actually his dad's. Sometimes these pictures get messed up. So his pyramid was first excavated in 1894 by a French Egyptologist named Jacques de Morgan. He reached the burial chamber after he discovered a tunnel that was dug by tomb robbers back in the day. Yeah, notice a boat here that they dug up when they were digging up the pyramid. The remains of 6 sacred barks were excavated outside the outer enclosure on the southern side. Again, that's his dad's there. Many shaft tombs around his belong to the royal women, and they were discovered on the north and south sides. It was first thought that they were topped by these things called mastabas or mastabas, but then it was recognized that these were hypogea, hypo being under and gea referring to the rocks. So other than things cut, there were basically some underground pyramids for the different women here that were built. So they discovered, as they're exploring here, the treasures of the princesses, Sithathor, Meret. Among these things, they found those pectorals with the names of the kings, Senuseret II and the third, and then the son that will come along later, Amenemhat III. In the king's chamber, they found pottery, a dagger, but the sarcophagus was empty. It actually is possible he was not buried here. He may have preferred another tomb as his final resting place. But that is the official pyramid for Mr. Senuseret III. Thank you, and thank you, wrong pyramid. So that's the new pharaoh. ruling by himself again for 20 years, starting in 1698 BC on the new and improved timeline and chronology. So this brings us to where we are in Genesis chapter 31. Jacob has worked 20 years for his uncle Laban, for 7 years, after which he got his first wife Leah, 7 years for which he got his second wife Rachel. He ended up with 2 more wives with their servants, their maids, and so he worked 6 more years tending to the flocks. And so things have not been going well these last 6 years. So let's pick up in Genesis chapter 31. Let's get back to where we are here. We are in Haran. So Jacob is up here. The northern part here, where his mom came from, of course, Laban is his mother's brother. So Genesis 31, let's take a look. Again, Jacob and his brother are 98 years old, did I say here? They are 93. Jacob's 93 here. He's got a bunch of baby kids. So, verse 1 of Genesis 31, now, Jacob heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what belonged to our father, he has made all this wealth. Jacob saw the attitude of Laban, and behold, it was not friendly toward him, as formerly. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to his flock in the field, and said to them, I see your father's attitude, that it is not friendly toward me as formerly. But the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength. Yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. However, God did not allow him to hurt me. If he spoke thus, the speckle shall be your wages, then all the flock brought forth speckle. And if he spoke thus, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock brought forth striped. Thus God has taken away your father's livestock and given them to me. And it came about at the time when the flock were mating that I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the male goats which were mating were striped, speckled, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. And I said, here I am. He said, lift up now your eyes and see that all the male goats which are mating are striped, speckled, and mottled. For I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar, where you made a vow to me. Now arise, leave this land, and return to the land of your birth. Rachel and Leah said to him, do we still have any portion or inheritance in our father's house? Are we not reckoned by him as foreigners? For he has sold us and has also entirely consumed our purchase price. Surely all the wealth which God has taken away from our father belongs to us and our children. Now then, do whatever God has said to you. Then Jacob arose and put his children and his wives upon camels. And he drove away all his livestock and all his property which he had gathered, his acquired livestock which he had gathered in Paddan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. When Laban had gone to shear his flock, then Rachel stole the household idols that were her father's. And Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he was fleeing. So he fled with all that he had. And he arose and crossed the Euphrates River and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. Okay, so it sounds like enough is enough. And the time has come. So Jacob's departing here, heading on back. Zoom out here. There's the Euphrates River that he crosses to get back home. And he's aiming towards the Gilead region, which is right here. In fact, let me do this. Bring that up a bit. So he's coming from Haran up here, across the Euphrates. He's aiming his way down toward over here, the Gilead region. So here's the Jordan River, Sea of Galilee, and the Dead Sea down here. On this side of the Jordan River is where Gilead is. We actually talked about it recently on Wednesday nights from a quote from Jeremiah about the balm of Gilead. So he's heading down here, making his way over. So let's take a look at some observations here. He says that verse 7, your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. However, God did not allow him to hurt me. Amen. Man can be fickle. Man can be self-absorbed. Man can get feel slighted and cheated and jaded. And so a man takes things into their own hands. Seems to be what Laban did here. But God was with Jacob and still took care of Jacob. In fact, God, ironically, as we see here, whatever Laban said, trying to cheat Jacob, became a blessing for Jacob. Well, okay, only ones that are born with spots, those are the ones that are going to be yours. So God saw to it that those are the ones that were born, and those were the strong ones, or the stripes. However Laban called the shots, God took over and blessed Jacob with it. So Jacob ended up with everything, and Laban's not got much, and his sons, Rachel and Leah's brothers, aren't too happy about this. Laban's not too happy. So things are not going well in the family dynamics. Family doesn't get jealous over family, does it? No, that doesn't happen. And so God says, it's time to go. Jacob calls his wives together and they say, we've got nothing from our father anymore. Everything we have is with you and our children. So they say, yeah, follow God. So they get up and they go. And it says in verse 18, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. So he's been gone for 20 years. It's 20 years later, Isaac is still alive. Remember, in his blind old age, he said, I need to bless y'all before I die. It's 20 years later, the dude's still alive.
That should be a happy surprise.
It should be a happy surprise, but it shows don't assume and don't panic.
Right.
And it was actually around that time that the 12th dynasty came into power and started. Was after the first Pharaoh was assassinated and the son came in charge. He said, no, we're going to start bringing in the sons a little earlier and make sure there's a smooth transition. So as he was getting blind in his old age, it seems Isaac may have been influenced by that and wanting to go ahead and bless Esau while he was still able to. Of course, that didn't work out very well for a few things. And so Jacob's dealing with the consequences, being away from home for 20 years. So he's heading back to his father Isaac. And so while verse 19, when Laban's out and about doing his farming and livestocking stuff, his daughter Rachel steals the household idols that were her father's. What? Why? I don't know. Was she worshiping those idols? Was she thinking she could melt them down for their value or sell them? I don't know what her motive was. We're not told, but that's not cool. I mean, adding insult to injury, stealing what was her father's, but then Laban, if you're recognizing the God of Abraham, your uncle, Abraham is Laban's uncle, or anyway. Abraham's the uncle of his dad, Bethuel. Anyway, if you're recognizing the God of Abraham, what are you doing with these idols in the first place? And then Rachel, as the daughter, what are you doing stealing them? Is that like you taking to this last bit of wealth, kicking your dad while he's down, whatever? Not cool on any sense. So they cross the Euphrates and on they go. So any initial reactions or questions on this first part of Genesis 31 with the departure of Jacob and his clan? All good? Let's read on. What happens next? Verse 22 of Genesis 31. When it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, then he took his kinsmen with him and pursued him a distance of 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the hill country of Gilead. So let's zoom in a little here. So Jacob's come on down and Laban's come on down after him, and they end up over here in this Gilead region. So that's over here. Again, there's the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, the Dead Sea. Jerusalem and all that over here. So it's on this side of the Jordan River, this Gilead region, where they end up. Verse 24, God came to Laban, the Aramean, which is just another word for Syrian. God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream of the night and said to him, be careful that you do not speak to Jacob, either good or bad. Laban caught up with Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen camped in the hill country of Gilead. Then Laban said to Jacob, what have you done by deceiving me and carrying away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and deceive me and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with joy and with songs and with timbrel and with lyre, and did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful not to speak either good or bad to Jacob. Now you have indeed gone away because you longed greatly for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods? Then Jacob replied to Laban, because I was afraid, for I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. The one with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what is yours among my belongings and take it for yourself. For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two maids, but he did not find them. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols and put them in the camel's saddle, and she sat on them. And Laban felt through all the tent, but did not find them. She said to her father, let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the manner of women is upon me. So he searched, but did not find the household idols. Then Jacob became angry and contended with Laban, and Jacob said to Laban, what is my transgression? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? Though you have felt through all my goods, what have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten the rams of your flocks. That which was torn of beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. You required it of my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Thus I was. By day the heat consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been for me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the toil of my hands, so he rendered judgment last night. Okay, so Laban catches up with Jacob here in the Gilead region, the hill country of Gilead, and he challenges him, what are you doing, fleeing in secret? And by the way, why'd you take my household idols? Jacob says, I was afraid you wouldn't let me go, you'd withhold your daughters from me, and what are you talking about with these household idols? And Jacob even says, whoever you find with your household idols, that person will not live. Not knowing it was the wife he loved, Rachel, who stole them. Be careful when you make a vow, when you make a declaration, when you're so determined in your righteousness or whatever you think your cause is, you might not have all the facts. And that was certainly the case here. So notice Laban in his huffing and puffing in verse 29, he says, it is in my power to do you harm. Just kind of so you know, I figured I'd throw that in there, make sure that wasn't lost in all this. But the God of your father spoke to me and said, don't say anything good or bad. Which reminds me of chapter 24, verse 50, when Abraham's servant came and found Rebekah and came to Laban, Rebekah's brother, and Bethuel, Rebekah's dad, and said, hey, Abraham sent me. I prayed to God. This is what happened. What do y'all think? And their response in Genesis 24:50 was, "This is from God. We cannot speak to you either good or bad." Thank you. That's a great place to be. Anytime you can recognize it's of God, end of the story. So now here's God telling Laban all these years later, "This is of me. Don't speak to Jacob, good or bad." So he said, "It's in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me saying, don't do anything." So Laban searches for these household idols, doesn't find them. His daughter has them in the pouch on the camel that she's sitting on. And she says, "Sorry, Dad, I can't get up because the time of women has come upon me." Now, I'm a guy. I'm going to, yes, darling wife, I'm going to tread carefully here. Women, ladies, there are some things guys just don't understand and have a clue about and cannot say that we've been in your shoes and know what something is like. So there are some things that you can claim and we could say, okay, that's your ball game, your world, it's not our world, so we take you at your word. And men, when something doesn't seem to be going too hard standing, don't automatically assume, oh, is this because that's what's going on right now? Don't do that. But also, ladies, and I know I don't have to say this, don't follow Rachel's example here and use that as an excuse or justification for something that is not cool. She stole and now she's lying. None of that is cool, and using that as an excuse. So yeah, so now Jacob lays into Laban, "Look, I've been with you 20 years. I suffered, I took the hits, and if God had not been for me, then I would have been with nothing. But God's the reason, because of your shenanigans against me, God's the reason I'm blessed and you're not." So here we are. So with that passage of Genesis 31, any reactions, thoughts, or questions on that whole exchange between God and Laban, and then Laban and Jacob, and the whole Rachel and household idol thing? People being people.
I was going to say that. I mean, the stories that we normally focus on, right?
Right.
About kind of that, the outer circle of it, and we have these Bible, these Bible studies and these stories, and then within something like this, we're kind of like, huh?
Yeah.
What?
I remember Jacob's ladder, but what's this now?
Gosh. For people, and it's a disappointing reminder of our humanity, when we think about these stories and our ancestors and stuff. It is disappointing when you get into these Bible studies, and because I think you go into it sometimes having these preconceived thoughts and ideas about who these biblical people were, and then everybody always will focus on David. He was just a man. But the other ones were,
Oh yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of, it's humbling. It is disappointing, but then it also shows God's faithfulness, and that's where the focus needs to be.
Right on.
Is it through all the things that we can muck up,
and we do,
then God is still faithful.
Amen. And we kind of pendulum swing too with our esteeming of people, even people in the Bible. We either put them on a pedestal or swing on and I've seen it swing on the opposite end of the pendulum swing, where these guys were horrible. God's the only good, and these guys are just a mess. And these people were a bunch of jokes and jerks and yada, yada. Well, no, the truth is somewhere in the middle. These people were trying to be godly and seeking God, and most of the time they were trying to, and sometimes their humanity got the better of them, just like us, which I appreciate, because again, just talking factually and somewhat generically, not judgmentally, but just observationally, other religions, they elevate their humans in their religion to a God status. Notice Pharaoh, Senuseret III, despite the somberness and the reality of how he was conveyed in his statues, he dealt with some real tough times in Egypt that were coming, and tying in with Joseph, spoiler alert there. But even he was one of the rare ones where in his lifetime, he was lifted up as a god. More to that as we go, but we clearly do not do that. We don't idol worship Father Abraham. We don't idol worship Peter, James, and John. We don't idol worship any of these folks. We recognize they are human and flawed just as we are. I love Acts 10 when Peter tells Cornelius, get up, I'm just a man like you. Paul and Barnabas, when they're worshipped as gods after healing a lame man, they tear their clothes and said, look, we're just like you. And so I appreciate so much the reality for me, while it's disappointing to see anyone's shortcomings and failures and human moments, I'm grateful that it's recorded in scripture because it shows they're just as human as I am. And not that the sin is ever okay, but our sin-infected humanity, it's okay that that's what we all have to deal with because we have the grace of God who understands that. And that's why Jesus came in the first place. We can look at these Old Testament pastors and go, y'all need Jesus. And we can look at our own lives and say, yeah, we all need Jesus. And yeah, that's the reality. By the way, coming from Haran down here to the Gilead area, about 350 miles, that trip there. So anything else on that passage?
See, I'm glad it does show that you're human.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, it's not, it's like an example that we can never live up to.
Right. Amen. If God can work with them despite those shenanigans, not that God is ever in favor of the shenanigans or turns a blind eye to it, there are consequences. But if God could still work through them and their consequences despite the shenanigans, there's hope for me yet. And we can learn from these and not repeat them. I try not to repeat them. Yeah, so thank you. I agree completely. So let's look to the end of this chapter here. Because remember, we've got not only Jacob and his 4 wives, Leah and Rachel, the sisters, and their maids, which were given to Jacob as wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, but we've got 11 sons and a daughter right now. And they're young. They're all chilling. Yet some are getting into their early teens, but some are down in their early age still. Morning. So let's pick up here in Genesis chapter 31, verse 43. And this is where we'll wrap up for today. So after all this, then Laban replied to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, and the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day to these my daughters, or to their children whom they have borne? So now come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. Then Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones. So they took stones and made a heap, and now they ate there by the heap. So verse 47 of Genesis 31, now Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Galeed. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me this day. Therefore it was named Galeed. And Mizpah, for he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent one from another. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. Laban said to Jacob, behold this heap, and behold the pillar which I have set between you and me. This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass by this heap to you for harm, and you will not pass by this heap and this pillar to me for harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his kinsmen to the meal, and they ate the meal and spent the night on the mountain. Early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his sons and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. So we have a happy ending after all this. Let's take a moment here to look at what happened here. So they agreed to make a covenant. Now, a covenant, as we know from spiritual, scriptural times, is very, very serious, very, very binding, very, very life or death oath kind of thing. And so when they put up these stones here, they make a pillar and make a covenant and an agreement here. Verse 47, Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, which means the heap of witness in the Aramean language. Jacob called it Gali, which means the exact same thing, heap of witness, but in Hebrew. And it's also called Mizpah in verse 49, which means watchtower. This is where Jehovah's Witnesses get the whole watchtower thing. Mizpah.
It sounds like,
Not bar mitzvah.
yeah.
Yeah, bar mitzvah versus a mizpah. Mizpah is the word for watchtower. Well, watch between you and me. That God is a witness that I'm not going to cross this line in this place here to you for harm. You're not going to cross this to me for harm. And God is watching over us even when you're down here and I'm up here. In your case, you're not going to harm my daughters out of my sight because that's going to be in God's sight. I love it when he says in verse 50, if you mistreat my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, because I guess 4 is okay, but no more than 4. You know, whatever they're there. But again, it says God is a witness between you and me. So the whole point of watchtower is God is a witness between us and watching as we go from here in this covenant agreement. And so they eat, they have a meal and agree. He says, Laban says in verse 53, the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor. Nahor is Abraham's brother, whose son was Bethuel, Laban's dad, Rebekah's dad. And so the God of Abraham and Abraham's brother Nahor, the God of their father, judged between us. Their father was Terah. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac, who's still alive. So they offer sacrifice, they come together, they eat the meal, and then in the morning, Laban says his goodbyes, kisses everyone off, and he goes home. So that is Genesis chapter 31, with Jacob finally departing from Laban with his wives and his 11 sons so far. He's not done. 11 sons and 1 daughter, and all their livestock, and coming back home to the land of his birth, the land of promise, the land of Canaan, and his resolving things with Laban, who goes back home. Any reactions, thoughts, comments, questions on the end of Genesis 31? Everyone all good there? Then that is a pretty good stopping place for us for this morning. We'll pick up next week in Genesis 32, Jacob now having to deal with Esau, with whom he had last departed on not the best of terms. And so we'll see how that all plays out. Feel free to look ahead. But with that, we'll go ahead and stop our share for now, stop recording, and get ready for our song service.